With NBA 2K27 now out, I'll be going over 5 teams, plus some honorable mentions, that you need to rebuild inside of MyNBA franchise mode. For one reason or another, these are the most compelling and interesting rebuilds in the game this year. Today we'll be focusing on 5 Eastern Conference teams, and then the next version of this video, I will have 5 Western Conference teams out later today. We've got another really fun year of NBA 2K content here on the channel. I'm super excited to get started, and I hope all of you are as well. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you're new for more MyNBA franchise content here on NBA 2K27. That feels good to say. I'll be starting my long-term franchise series on Friday. The team has not been decided. I genuinely do not know who it will be, which is kind of a problem because I'm starting my series in 2 days. I've narrowed my list down to 5, and the final part of the vote is now open down below in the description. And some of the teams in that top 5 I'll be going over today as the rationale of why I would consider them for the series. I think there are some really good choices this year, and my top 5 is kind of all over the board with rebuilding teams, but also contending teams as well. Obviously, we'll be starting off in the modern era, 2026, and I feel like there's a rationale for a large majority of the teams in the league. There are so many different stories that can be told. Obviously, you've got the traditional rebuilds, the cellar dwellers who are looking to build through the draft, but you've also got teams who are stuck in the middle, who are projected to be pretty much play-in teams and don't really have a way out. But there are also contending teams I'm interested in that appear to be pretty good in the short term, but have a lot of long-term roster question marks. So the first team I'm going to go over today is one of those teams in my top 5, and it seems like a strange choice at first, but I'm going to need you guys to hear me out on the Philadelphia 76ers. I really believe this is one of the most interesting rebuilds for 2K27, and you're probably thinking, rebuild? They just signed LeBron James. They have 4 players who are at least a 90 overall. Why would the Sixers be an interesting rebuild when they have tied for the best title odds in the Eastern Conference? Well, I really think this team is in a fascinating spot because their long-term outlook post-LeBron has a lot of question marks, in my opinion. Obviously, the first season or 2 with LeBron on the roster should be very exciting, and this team will absolutely be contending for a title. However, there are still a lot of questions with this group, if they're going to mesh together, if they're going to stay healthy. And in the limited testing I've done so far on 2K, these guys are not very good in the sim. The first test sim I did, they missed the play-in the first year. The second season, granted without LeBron, they had the worst record in the Eastern Conference. So I'm not convinced that these guys are set-in-stone contenders inside of 2K27, which I think makes them really interesting for a rebuild this year. We'll start with where everything revolves around, and that's the signing of LeBron James, who in my opinion really completes this roster. He gives them a lead playmaker and a lead ball handler to truly set the offense around. He's 41 years old. I think he's got 2 years basically left in the league, and I still think he can absolutely provide winning basketball for these guys. He doesn't need to score to be impactful. He's going to be their best passer and provide really good defense. I really like the new relationships that they've added inside of MyNBA. It feels like you have to navigate the dynamics of a locker room. Why is Wendell Carter the only guy he doesn't like? Is he mad that Wendell Carter bagged Angel Reese? I feel like that should be, under Jalen Duren's thing, not LeBron. But he's got 2 years, obviously very cheap money, which is certainly an asset, having a player as good as him, making as little amount of money as him. But once he's gone, I think the rest of this roster is in a really weird place between Maxey, Brown, Embiid, and VJ Edgecombe, because all 4 of those guys have 3 years left on their deal. So they're going to be here for 1 more season than LeBron James, and then all 4 of them enter free agency at the same time, which means after the 3rd season, this team might look a lot different, in my opinion. And I'm not convinced without LeBron, these guys are going to be all that good. I mean, the first sim I did where LeBron was gone, they won 21 games. Maxey and Jaylen Brown are going to be free agents. Joel Embiid will obviously opt into that player option, but then eventually he'll be a free agent. VJ Edgecombe will be restricted. He's a guy you're probably going to prioritize keeping. But it's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. Because if this core 4 ends up being really good and they all ask for big contracts, you're not going to be able to afford them because of the second apron. If they're not good and don't mesh together, then you have to start an entirely new rebuild. So no matter what happens with this group, it's going to be really hard to build this team after year 3. I am certainly excited about the possibility of having a young guy, though, like VJ Edgecombe, who showed a lot of promise as a rookie, but now on this LeBron James-led roster, he's the 5th wheel. in the starting lineup. He's really got to figure out how to play off the ball, provide spacing, and consistent defense if he wants consistent minutes on the floor. It's a very delicate balance for the Sixers because they don't want to do anything to mess up his long-term development, but they also want him to fit this current group. You've got Tyrese Maxey, who I think will play off LeBron really well, given his ability to play on and off the ball. At only 25 years old, he should theoretically be good for the long haul, but if things go south and this team starts to struggle in the second and third seasons, are we sure Tyrese Maxey is even going to want to stick around as he eventually enters his 30s and potentially is still chasing a championship? Nonetheless, I think he's a fantastic player, and I'm definitely intrigued about the addition of Jaylen Brown. A lot of people had him as an MVP candidate last year, and I'm not sure I agree. Statistically, the Celtics were better when he was not on the floor. So I really feel like there's a lot to prove for Jaylen Brown. A chip on his shoulder, which I'm hoping will certainly elevate his game. And then obviously you've got the man in the middle, Joel Embiid. When everybody's healthy, Embiid is still very much the best player on this team, and he's still one of the best players in the NBA. The problem is you don't know if he's going to stay on the floor. That's always a question mark with Joel. But when he was out there last year, he averaged 27 a game, and he's only a few years removed from his peak when the guy was averaging 35 on elite defense and elite splits. It's certainly a fascinating five, but once LeBron's gone and once the rest of this group starts to trickle out, there's not a ton of young talent outside of Edgecombe and maybe the rookie LeBaron Philon Jr. out of Alabama. The Sixers also do not have a lot of draft capital to add young talent. They do have their first rounder this year, but they only have one over the following 4 years after that. Granted, it is a pretty good swap best pick between them and the Clippers. I think at least one, maybe both of those teams are going to be bad in 2029. They did give up their valuable 2028 Clipper pick to the Celtics in order to get Jaylen Brown. They don't have a lot of picks otherwise, which will make this team a challenging rebuild in a post-LeBron era. So sure, the 76ers on paper are title contenders this year, but this team still has a lot of flaws, a lot of questions when it comes to the health, specifically with Joel Embiid. If he continues to regress, then this title window could shut really quickly without an easy avenue for it to open back up. I get that the Sixers are an untraditional and out-of-the-box rebuild, but I really think they're one of the most fascinating teams in the game. Their long-term roster outlook is not great, and even though the ceiling for this team is an NBA title this year, I think they have a lot more questions than answers even with their current group. If you're looking for more of a traditional rebuild, another team inside my final five for the series is the Milwaukee Bucks. They're in an interesting spot, a transition phase, given that they finally traded away Giannis Antetokounmpo right before the NBA draft to the Miami Heat for a collection of players and draft picks. So now the Bucks enter a new post-Giannis era, and on paper, they're certainly not one of the better teams in the league. This feels a lot like the Miami Heat without Bam Adebayo, which is not a particularly good team. They've got an intriguing cast of young players, and they have two new lottery picks with their rookies, Braden Burries and Nate Ament, who we'll dive a little deeper into in just a second. You'd like to think a team like the Bucks, who are not particularly good, you can build through the draft with, but they don't have control of any of their first rounders until 2031. They don't have any picks this year, a swap worst in 28, nothing in 29, and they don't have their own pick in 2030. So this team's in a really tough spot because they lack long-term upside other than their two rookies and maybe a couple of the other guys they have. And they don't really have draft picks because they traded them all away during the Giannis era. Their pick this year belongs to Atlanta and New Orleans. That would have been in the Drew Holiday trade all the way back. And then the Blazers control their picks in 2028 and 2030 thanks to the Damian Lillard trade. And Washington has control of their pick in 2029, I would imagine in part with the Chris Middleton-Kyle Kuzma swap. The Bucks really sold their soul for the devil with Giannis, and now they are paying the price. Now they enter a really gruesome rebuild with not a lot of draft capital to rebuild with this roster. I do like the two rookies, though. These two guys give this team some much-needed upside. We'll start with Braden Burries, the number 10 pick out of the University of Arizona. Burries is a guy who I think is going to last in this league for a while. I think he has a high floor, but a reasonably high ceiling as well. He's very crafty, a lot of finesse, and very good feel for the game. He can score from all three levels, he's a solid enough playmaker, and he's a pretty good defender. At 6'4", you wish he had more on-ball ability, but that's really the only major gripe I have with him, and it's certainly something he can develop, especially with all the reps he'll probably get in Milwaukee. There's also Nate Ament, who was a very polarizing prospect during the draft, a very highly regarded recruit who has all the physicals, 6'10", and can really shoot it. Now, his feel for the game is a little bit questionable. His efficiency at Tennessee last year was very up and down, and his overall impact felt very up and down with the Vols. But the Bucks believe that they can develop his upside, and I think Milwaukee's a good spot for him because much like Braden Burries, they're going to let him run loose this year. It might be a little ugly at times, but I think there's a lot to like with his game. They added Tyler Hero as one of the focal points in the Giannis trade. He only has 1 year left on his deal. I'm curious to see how Tyler Hero looks back at home in Milwaukee. I'm really surprised that Bam Adebayo is not one of the names listed here. Like, what beef does he have with Chris Paul? Cole Anthony being there is so based, though. Much respect, Tyler. But I'm curious to see what he looks like as pretty clearly the #1 guy in terms of the scoring load this year. Although I believe the best long-term prospect on this team might be Ryan Rollins, which speaks to how good he is, but it also speaks to how bad the rest of the roster is. I really like Rollins' game. I really thought he had a real shot to win the most improved player last year. 17.5 points a game on really good shooting splits, nearly 41% from three. I think Khalil Ware probably has the highest ceiling of anybody on this roster. A 7-footer who has really intriguing scoring ability and can defend a little bit. He's certainly raw. It never really felt like he was able to get a consistent role in Miami, but there's a ton of upside with Khalil Ware, and I'm excited to see what he does here with the Bucks. They've also got some other veterans like Miles Turner, Kevin Porter Jr. Jaime Jaquez had a quietly really good season last year with Miami. And I like the young guys with Burries, Nate Ament, Kasparis Yakuchonis, even Bogle Yub Markovic I'm a little bit intrigued by. And Ousmane Dieng was a former lottery pick as well. I think the lack of draft capital, though, is what makes the Bucks a really fascinating rebuild and one of my favorites in the game this year. The third team who we're going to go over is the Orlando Magic. These guys are kind of stuck in the middle. They're in a really weird spot. They don't seem like a normal traditional rebuild, but they're kind of like the Sixers in a sense where their long-term roster outlook is not great. Now, unlike the Sixers, I think they have more young talent to work with, but they're also worse in the short term than Philadelphia. They've got the duo of Paulo Banchero and Franz Wagner here for the long haul. Desmond Bane is under contract for 3 years. Jalen Suggs is under contract for 4. So you're kind of trapped with this group. I think the Suggs deal is pretty tradable, but for a team that I don't know if they really have much room to get better, and they only have control of 1 first-rounder until 2031, that being this year. They're in a tough spot. I like the guys on this team. I like their 2 best players, but both of these guys have a lot of questions to answer. Paulo Banchero was really not that good last year. His efficiency was a problem, his shot diet was a mess, and it was pretty obvious that the Magic offense just flowed a lot better when oftentimes he was not in the game. Now, I still really believe in this 6'10", 250-pound, tough shot maker. I still see the upside with him, but his development, in my opinion, has plateaued quite a bit, and the Magic are going to have to find ways to build around him, and he's going to have to find ways to be a smarter basketball player in terms of the shots he takes and his overall impact to winning, because I don't really think that was there last year. As for Franz Wagner, I do think there are some questions with the long-term fit on the roster. He missed a lot of games last year with injury. The outside shot's always been up and down. It was certainly better a year ago, but it's never something that's been a consistent part of Franz Wagner's game in the 5 seasons that he has been with the Orlando Magic. He's absolutely an all-star talent. There's no question about that, but he's got to be more consistent with the shooting. You certainly hope he'll stay healthy. You'll certainly hope that the fit with him and Paulo feels more natural than it's been at times. You really need these two to work out, given how long they're under contract, how much the Magic have invested in them and will continue to do so. I do think Desmond Bane fits those 2 guys really well. I see why the Magic gave up so much for him. Sure, it sucks not really having a lot of draft capital over the next few years, but I think you can live with it. Having a guy like Desmond Bane who provides this team a lot of spacing and really the perfect connective off-ball piece offensively. He's a tremendous outside shooter and is going to continue to give those guys opportunities. But they need to find a long-term point guard because that's been a problem for this team for quite a while. Jalen Suggs is a tremendous defender, but he was unplayable offensively by the end of the year. His offense is not horrible, but it leaves a lot to be desired. He's never been an overly efficient player. He's only shot above 34% from 3 once. And then there's Anthony Black, who I think made some nice strides last year as a scorer. But much like Suggs, I don't know if he's a good enough playmaker to be your #1 ball handler, your #1 facilitator. I think he's a pretty good passer, but do you want him or Jalen Suggs being the guy who engines the offense as the catalyst? I don't know. I think the inconsistent shooting and the lack of playmaking this roster has leads to a very clunky fit offensively, and they don't really have a lot of young talent to make this work. Maybe Noah Pender or Jace Richardson turns into a nice role player. Tristan Da Silva is a guy who I like quite a bit. But, I mean, this team has a lot of flaws on its roster. I just don't think the group really fits together, and I don't see how they get out of this. The fourth team we're going to go over today, another more traditional rebuild. These guys are expected to be one of the worst teams in the league this year, and that's the Brooklyn Nets. A team that I think is in an interesting spot, in some ways pretty similar to the Milwaukee Bucks, because as we're going to discuss, they don't have their first-round draft pick this year. I think this roster is going to be at times hard to watch. Michael Porter Jr. and Julius Randle will probably lead to some ugly basketball on League Pass this season. And other than that, they don't have anybody higher than a 76 overall. Now, unlike Milwaukee, they do have plenty of overall draft capital despite not having their first rounder this year. They still have 2 other picks this year, probably later in the first, but they have 2 swap best picks in 2028, which I think could end up being pretty valuable. I've got my eye on that Sixers-Suns pick. If the Sixers flame out, that could be valuable, and I'm not sure I trust the Suns to be good, and they only need one of those teams to be bad. 3 first-rounders in 2029. They've got their own picks in 2030 and 2031, along with a Knicks pick that year, and they have plenty of second-rounders. This team is one of the largest draft treasure chests in the NBA, so if you're looking for a draft and develop rebuild, the Brooklyn Nets might be the #1 choice for that, given all the picks they have. I'm not sure what you do with these two, though. Michael Porter Jr. had a strong season last year. His trade value is never higher than it will be right now. So if you want to maximize his value, trading him, getting a first-round pick, and maybe an okay young player could certainly make sense. I don't know if he's a guy who you certainly trust as a #1, #2, or even a #3 on a championship contender, but I do think he fits as a good role player who can shoot the ball. Then there's Julius Randle, who's had his ups and downs throughout his career, looking to revive himself a little bit in Brooklyn. He'll probably be the #1 guy in terms of touches and in terms of usage here. I'm very curious to see how that goes. I'm not sure I believe in it, but I'm intrigued to watch. Right now, the Brooklyn Nets, I don't think, have one of the best young cores in the NBA, but I could see how that changes in a year or two with the draft picks they have, and if 1 or 2 of these young players really develop. Of this group, the player who I think is the best long-term asset on the roster is their first-rounder this year, Michael Brown Jr., drafted 6th overall out of Louisville. I think he has a really intriguing skill set. There was certainly some bumps in the road this year with the Cardinals. By the end of the season, he obviously had the back problems, but he's an intriguing guard who can slash and shoot. He can play on and off. The defense has got to get a little better, but at 6'5", 190, he's an impressive athlete with a really well-rounded skill set offensively. I really believe in him moving forward. I think this was a really good pick by the Brooklyn Nets. I really thought he was one of the 5 or 6 best prospects in this draft. They, of course, had 5 first-rounders in the 2025 draft, and while I don't think they really made good use of those picks, I'm very intrigued by Yeager Gilman. I was not super high on him as a prospect. His rookie season really surprised me, though, for a lot of the right reasons. I really didn't trust the shot from BYU, and I really didn't trust he'd be able to play off the ball, but he did a really good job of that at times last year with the Brooklyn Nets. And the three-point shot, which was a big weakness for him coming out of college, now looks like a real strength. He shot 38.5% from beyond the arc, and he looks more like an off-ball player than an on-ball player, and I'm certainly willing to revisit my evaluation on him, and I definitely see a future where he definitely carves out a nice role. They've also got Nolan Traore, Ben Sarup, those guys are only 20. Drake Powell's 21. Noah Clowney, Danny Wolf, they're 22. I like Joshua Jefferson, who they picked late in the first round out of Iowa State. A Swiss Army knife, who I think is going to be a good role player in this league. I think Day'Ron Sharpe is really underrated. I think there are some fun players on this team, but it might be an ugly watch this season. Some honorable mentions that I'd like to keep an eye on, the first of which is the Chicago Bulls, who have finally entered a rebuild. For their sake, thank goodness. They obviously had some luck moving up to the #4 pick in the draft, drafting Caleb Wilson, who I think is pretty unquestionably the guy for this team. I wasn't really sure what to think of Caleb Wilson. I remember being impressed watching him when UNC played Kansas early in the year, and then he had some strange disses to Darren Peterson. I was like, who is this guy? But the more I look at him, the more I just realize he's kind of a psycho in the best way possible. I'm just kind of all the way in on his mindset, and certainly as a player, he was fantastic with the Tar Heels this season. It's a shame that he didn't get to play in the tournament. I think him and Matas Buzelis creating an intriguing 1-2 duo. I'm not as high on Buzelis as others, but I'm still really excited about him, and I think he's shown a lot of promise in his first 2 seasons. Josh Giddey's only 24. Norman Powell was an all-star last year. Nick Claxton, I think, could be a nice bounce-back candidate, and maybe you get something out of one of these young guys down here. Dalen Swain had a rough summer league, but I liked him as a prospect. It seems like the stock is lowering on Noah Essengay, but he only played 6 minutes last season, and I really liked him as a prospect as well. Maybe you get something from Rob Dillingham. I really liked Leonard Miller a few years ago. I still believe in him, and they have all of their first-round picks and plenty of second-rounders as well. This is a very straightforward rebuild, in my opinion. A young team with their own picks who's not expected to be very good, but has some good pieces, particularly Caleb Wilson and Matas Buzelis. I don't think there's anything super fascinating about these guys, but they're very traditional. They're very steady. You can't go wrong with them. A more outside-the-box and creative pick, I would say, is the Boston Celtics. They're on the other side of the Jaylen Brown-Paul George trade. You've got Jason Tatum, who is nearing 30 years old, coming off the big injury, but is still one of probably the 6, 7 best players in the NBA. The rest of the roster, though, has some questions. Derek White has been a little disappointing as of late. I still think there's a little left in the tank for Paul George, but they're banking on him to have a good year. I like Peyton Pritchard. I like Neemias Queta. And I do really like the young guys on this team. I'm intrigued by Chris Sinak's potential. I'm all the way in on Hugo Gonzalez being a long-term fit here. I'm all the way in on Jordan Walsh sticking around. I'm intrigued by Dylan Mitchell, Baylor Shireman, Amari Williams. I think this team is quite a bit, and I think they're going to be really good this year, and they've got a good young nucleus, I think, for the future. Plus, that Clipper pick in 2028, I think, could be pretty nice. They've got a Sixers pick in 2031. That Sixers team probably will not be very good in 2031. VJ Edgecombe will probably still be there, maybe Maxey, possibly Jaylen Brown, but I think in 5 years, especially in 2K, that Sixers team could be kind of ugly. The other honorable mention I want to shout out is the Charlotte Hornets. They made one of the more fascinating moves of the offseason, trading away LaMelo Ball. The timing of it felt really surprising because it felt like LaMelo Ball and this roster really gelled last year. They had one of the best offenses in the league in the second half of the season, and it felt like Charlotte was building something, and then they immediately tear it down. I don't know why, though. I just kind of have a blind optimism for this front office and for Jeff Peterson. I just kind of believe in him. It's just sort of a gut feeling. They've got an intriguing 1-2 punch for the future with Brandon Miller and Con Knippel. Con was excellent last season, and I really wonder what the long-term ceiling for him is. Is he just going to be like a superstar role player and an elite connective piece, which there's absolutely room for that on any championship team? Or can he be a little more than that? Regardless, I think you're really excited about him, and I think there's a ton of talent with Brandon Miller, even though his efficiency's been up and down. He's had a hard time staying on the floor. I have a hard time thinking Charlotte's not going to pay him, and I think you kind of have to, given his potential. I like Naz Reid. I like Kobe White. Moussa Diabate is a good player. Ryan Kalkbrenner is a really good player. And then I'm intrigued by these young guys. They certainly whiffed on the Tijan Salon selection. I never really understood that one. But I like their 2025 class a lot, obviously led by Khan. I really like their 2026 class as well. I'm a big fan of Christian Anderson's game, and I think Hannes Steinbach is going to be a pretty good player as well. You've got those guys. You've got Liam McNeely, who they picked in 2025, Sion James. Obviously, Ryan Kalkbrenner, I think, is fantastic. I think this is a pretty fun team. And even though I don't really get the LaMelo Ball trade in a vacuum, I kind of see the vision with this group. They've got a lot of draft capital as well. 3 first-rounders this year. That Mavericks pick could end up being pretty good. They have plenty of second-rounders. I don't really care for the Timberwolves swap picks. I think LaMelo is going to be a great fit there, and I think they're going to be a really good team. But I like a lot of the players on this Charlotte roster. I think they could be fun and frisky, even without LaMelo Ball, who I think is fantastic. There are some other teams I'll briefly gloss over who I want to shout out. I think Indiana with Tyrese Halliburton could be fun. Detroit and Toronto could be kind of interesting. Those rosters are supposed to be contending. Cleveland with Donovan Mitchell's long-term deal, I feel like they're kind of in a weird spot. Even Atlanta. I mean, you can really rationalize any team in the East other than the Knicks, I think. But the fifth and final team in the East that I'll go over today is the Washington Wizards. This is one of the most fascinating teams in the league, in my opinion. I'm really curious to see what direction they end up taking this. Adding Anthony Davis and Trae Young certainly gives them a 1-2 punch that I think has a lot of pressure. Those two guys, I think, are going to have big chips on their shoulder. But everything here obviously revolves around the number 1 overall draft pick from BYU, AJ DeBonsa, who I think of the top rookies in this year's class, I think at least in NBA 2K, he'll be the best of the group because he's 6'9", he's an unbelievable athlete, he's really efficient around the basket. If he improves the outside shot and adds to the defense, man, it's over. Personally, I was a little higher on both Darren Peterson and Cam Boozer as prospects in real life, although it's very close. I don't think the Wizards made a bad choice at number 1 or anything. But I do think that DeBonsa has the most long-term upside of that group because he has a lot of the things physically that you just can't really teach. And he won the scoring title as a freshman last year. I mean, ridiculously impressive stuff. I think the ancillary skills are a little bit worse than that of Darren Peterson and Cam Boozer, which is why I have him a tick below them. But if he hits his ceiling, he will win MVPs in this league. You've also got Trae Young and Anthony Davis. What are these two guys going to look like? Anthony Davis is still really good. His play really has not declined at all, per se. Maybe a little bit, but not that much. It's just about him staying healthy after missing much of last season, and he didn't play at all after getting traded to Washington. Then there's Trae Young. You signed the big contract extension. I'm not sure I would have done that if I was Washington. Atlanta was a much better team in the second half of the year when they traded him away. They did not miss him in the slightest. The numbers are a little bit deceiving last year because he played less minutes. And if you look at his per 36 numbers, the numbers are very steady with where he's been throughout his career. I just don't know how much he truly impacts winning basketball. But if the guys on the Wizards hit their ceiling, I think there's a lot of size and length here that can mask some of Trae Young's efficiency and defensive question marks. Not to mention with AJ, Trae, and Anthony Davis, they already have been building a young core. That starts with Alex Sarr, the former number 2 pick, who certainly went through a rocky road to start his career, but I think he's starting to turn into a hit. 16 a game last year. His efficiency improved massively. The defense, I think, has a lot of potential. I really like Keyshawn George as well. Really improved the three-point shot, intriguing passing ability, switchable defender. I like the upside a lot. I still think he's got quite a bit to improve on, but here in year 3, I'm really excited about his game and what he brings to the table. Outside of the new additions of AD, Trae, and AJ Debonsa, I think Sarr and George are the two best long-term pieces here. If one or two of Trey Johnson, Bub Carrington, or Bilal Coulibaly hit, that's a big deal. And I really like Will Riley as well. I thought he was really impressive in the second half of the year. I'm surprised 2K gave him a 78, but I think he completely deserves it. I think no one's really talking about him, but I think he's going to be a really good player for the Wizards. Otherwise, that'll wrap up the episode. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Don't forget to vote down below in the description, as your vote may certainly influence my decision. I'll have part 2 to this video later today, going over 5 teams in the Western Conference that you should look at. Otherwise, don't forget to once again hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you're new for more NBA 2K27 MyNBA franchise mode. Peace out.